Hello and welcome to another episode of the Select Characters Podcast. I'm Sam Yates, and today I will be your host, and I will also be everybody else. I am the only one here. I'm flying it solo today. I'm going to try and keep at least a little bit of content going up, but now that you're aware that I'm the only one here, if you want to go ahead and check out, come back next week. We should have a pretty good crew going. So from that point forward, I guess I'm just going to take it. I'm going to run with it, kind of stream of consciousness stuff. I got a couple of bits lined up that I want to try and do, but in general, just to reiterate, my voice is the only one you're going to be hearing. Can't really talk constantly, gonna have to take a break to breathe every now and again, but that is the disclaimer out of the way. So let's see. It has been another excellent week for video games. Let's talk a little bit about what I've been playing. I've been playing Rimworld still more, and since I have this whole space to myself, I'm going to talk about that for a little bit. I found a really nice mod pack. It's called Hardcore SK for those of you who are out there still jamming on Rimworld. It's 100% worth a look. It adds tons of new factions, tons of new stuff, just more in general, and I like almost all the pieces of it. One criticism of it could be that there is a lot of interdependencies. It adds a lot of new materials. It adds a lot of stuff that makes things more difficult in general. The example I was going to use was going to be making bread. So bread's not in vanilla Rimworld, I guess, to start with, but let's say you want to bake bread. Well, if you're going to bake bread, you got to grow wheat. And if you're going to grow wheat, you're going to need seeds so that you can plant them to grow the wheat. These are all new things and a little bit micromanagey, right? So you need the seeds, you need the crops, you grow the crops, you need a table that, I think it's the butcher's table. You use the butcher's table to grind the wheat, and then you need an oven to bake the wheat. So you need more tables, more jobs, more items. All the way down the line, it becomes more complicated. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Sam, that sounds dumb. Why would I want all those extra little steps? That doesn't really seem like it adds anything. I felt the same way too, but the more I thought about it, it sort of actually does, because every step of that process is an addition of an interesting decision. So when you don't start out with seeds, so if you want to grow wheat at all, you have to buy the seeds. So the first thought is this money I should spend on seeds, or is it money I should spend on something else? You're making trade-offs basically from square one. And then you got to plant the wheat. So is this time I want a colonist to use to do that, or do I want them to do something else? And you can make different types of soil tiles. And so to do that, you actually need composting bins. And so that's a whole nother issue there. Do I want to use my corpses for compost? Do I want to cook them for meat? What's the best way to get the most efficiency out of this process? And you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you've got some wheat outside that's 60% grown and you're starving to death. So that's awesome. I like it. I mean, I think that overall it adds a lot of stuff. There's a bunch of new metals. Just in general, it sounds like it's a lot more busy work, but it's really not. And getting to any kind of an actual tech level is, I mean, forgive me the word, but it's tantric, man. Like when you're doing a Tiger Woods fist pump because you actually got a power plant up and running, then that is a whole nother level of it. So it takes a game that is very good and sort of stretches it over a longer period of time without thinning it out. I don't know what the word for that concept is, but highly recommend it. Hardcore SK pack, if you're out there and you're still playing Rimworld, definitely get some of that going on. Outside of Rimworld, I haven't really been playing much. I kind of had some stuff this week, so this space is obviously going to be a little bit smaller. Now, let's see. I also have a couple of things here. I've got some calls from the public. Calls. Let's see. I've got Band from our Discord channel who says, talk about Dwarf Fortress. Well, I don't know exactly what to talk about with Dwarf Fortress. It's a great game. I do like it a lot, and it is very much Rimworld similar, although much more sort of simulation wise and less game wise. And I find that there's a few sort of exploity tricks in Dwarf Fortress that I don't like so much, like danger rooms, and in general it's not really video gamey enough for me, I guess you could say. So that's my general view on that one. I do like it a lot, and I did play it for a while back in the day, and I think when I was playing it, like, most of the focus was going into building out that adventure mode, which I don't have any interest in at all, because I think there's a lot of roguelikes that do the single character stuff better than that, although If you're looking for a sheer absolute wealth of content, then yeah, that game's got tons. And it also has the bridges that you can bounce people in the air with, so that's obviously a perk. Yeah, Dwarf Fortress is a good game. It's a very good game. One of the things that I've mentioned that I do like about Rimworld as compared to Dwarf Fortress is that you have a smaller number of people, so it feels much more intimate in that sense, and I do like that part. But in general, yeah, Dwarf Fortress is a good one. Let's see. I've also got another question from Band in our Discord channel who says, can you talk about, he says rant, but I'm not really a ranter, views of why gamers expect developers to communicate? Well, that's a complicated issue. I think that expect is definitely overreaching. I think that it's nice when developers take the time to say what they're doing, what they're working on, and how things are going. But I would consider that more of a perk than an expectation. And it's tough. I mean, I know when you spend money on something, you want to know what's happening with it. You want to know where it's going, and you want to know, you just want to know. You want to know what's up. With this whole recent early access trend and all that stuff, consumers have more of a voice in the way the product turns out than they ever have. And something about it is the fact that when developers do communicate, you feel like they hear you more, or you feel like they're listening more, even though it's like the combination's weird because they're talking more, but you feel like they're listening more. And also the fact that that's not always the best thing, because often the vocal people may not be the people with the best ideas. There's normally a silent majority out there who's enjoying the game just the way it's going. And maybe also it's got something to do with the fact that it's nerve-wracking in a way. Like, there's so many examples out there now, more than there ever have been, where people are getting burned on their purchases, and maybe they just need a little bit of reassurance. Maybe that's another reason that people want to go for it. What I can say is that I know on their end, putting out that communication is never a fire and forget solution, because they have to think about what they say, because everything that they say in a public forum, they are the voice of authority. So anything they say in a public forum can be taken in 100 different ways. So they have to take time out of their day to write this thing, and they have to take time to make sure it sounds right, make sure it conveys the right message. And even if that's not entirely true, maybe there's a group of people who are just want to hear something. You know, they're not going to harp on all the details or anything like that. It still feels like something you have to consider. It feels like something you have to craft every time you want to put something out to the public, and that takes time. And it takes time out of a day when you're just trying to get stuff done. And when you're trying to get work done and you have to take an hour to type up a nice sounding announcement or a nice sounding news about here's what's going on, that can kind of be a bummer. And I'd wager that even the developers who make it sound like they have a more casual attitude towards that stuff are still putting time into it, and they're still thinking about the ways that it can go sideways. And that, I think, is what makes them communicate less. So those are the two sides, I think, on that particular issue. You have the group of consumers saying, talk to us, and then you have the developers who are maybe a little bit skittish about it, because that can absolutely go wrong. And also, in addition to that, you have the fact that when you put out something like that people can comment on and that you can get feedback on, news and stuff like that, you end up, when you're reading through that stuff, it's very easy to gloss over the good ones and have only the bad ones stick out in your head. So a chain of 100 comments, the ones that you walk away with and the ones that start popping up in your mind later on in the day are more than likely like the negative ones. And so to expose yourself to that is also not something that you exactly want to be doing. So you're a little bit against it from the get-go, and then there's all the problems with it. So that, I think that's the push and pull of that situation there, as far as developers not wanting to communicate and people wanting them to communicate. And then also, what do you actually, as far as the consumer side, you don't really gain anything except for knowledge, but it doesn't impact you as much as it is a potential downside for them. So the communication thing, the risk often outweighs the reward. So the level of news that you want to wade into that shark pool with is often higher, and you don't want to let minor stuff go. So yeah, that's what I would say all that stuff together adds up to be. Combination of all of those factors, and then in addition, maybe not entirely, because then the more you accept them in, the more they you have the potential to cater to the masses instead of creating that own vision that you wanted. I don't know how many reasons that was, but I'd imagine it's some combination of those that cause all the issues around communication. But in general, man, I think, yeah, just like it's nice, but it's definitely not something to be expected, because you shouldn't really expect anything out of anything, right? Why would you have any expectations about a creative product? That's weird. Okay, let's see. I've got another question here, and it is from Karen, and that question is, what is it exactly about video games that appeals to you? How have your tastes changed as you've continued gaming through your life? Well, hey, that's a very interesting question. The thing about video games that appeals to me, at least currently and right now, and actually let me answer that second question first. My tastes have changed dramatically as I've continued to game throughout my life, and I've actually, as I've thought about it, had a lot of internal reflection and thoughts about sort of what I get out of it and why I do the things that I do, in particular why I like the kind of games I like. And so I'm not sure if my tastes have changed as a sort of result of that introspection, or if my tastes have just changed because I've changed as a person, because we all do. But what I think is that what I get out of video games is a place to solve interesting problems in a basically zero consequences sort of fashion. So I get to try things and figure things out and experiment in a place that's very safe and can't actually impact me in the real world. But I do like the simulated sort of consequences to be very high, because it adds pressure on the problem solving, and that means that's awesome. That's what I like. When I talk to people and I'm like, yeah, when I talk about getting all the juice out of a game, I'm talking about figuring out all the puzzles and all the problems that it presents me with, because that's more important to me. The learning process and the problem solving process is what I get the best stuff out of a game with. So even I'll have games that I haven't finished, but I've got all the juice out of them, so I don't expect anything more from that. I don't expect to be encountered with anything that I haven't seen before, and at that point the game has nothing left for me. So we're running on fumes, and the only thing that can save it at that point is, I don't know, like maybe just it's fun mechanically, or maybe there's an interesting character in it, or a good story or something. But mainly, like, the pure, beautiful syrup gaming extract juice is that very first coming to it. I have no idea what's going on. How do I figure these things out? What can I do? And when that happens in more of a high pressure situation, I'm more satisfied. So moving on from that, oh, actually, one more thing. There was somebody I was talking to who said, and this sort of interested me. They were talking about somebody they talked to, and they were talking to like their psychiatrist or something, and they asked him, and they said, well, what do you do in your day-to-day life? And they said, well, I go these places, I do these things, and I have these tasks that I have to complete. And then they said, well, what do you do to relax? And they said, video games. And they said, well, what do you do in video games? And they said basically the same thing, right? I have to do these quests, I have to kill these monsters, I have to go these places and do this, this, and this. And it's just a way, it's almost like, yeah, it's exactly, and that ties into what I was saying before. It's a no consequences way to just keep the brain cycle spinning and keep yourself activated and keep yourself feeling like you're doing stuff even though you're really not. That's definitely another part of it, is that it activates the part of the brain that makes you feel productive in a weird way. So I like that, but that accomplishment that is within all that stuff, and the accomplishment of saying I beat this game used to be very important to me when I was much younger, and the success of finishing a cartridge or the feeling of beating the final level was very appealing. But I think, looking back on that, it still absolutely is, but that I was confusing the concepts of finishing the game with wringing the juice out of a game, and now maybe I've refined the process to more suit my personal tastes. And then there was a whole section sort of in the middle where all that stuff got wrapped up into a social layer, and it was about presentation. It was about the being able to tell somebody that I beat this game, or it was about sort of wearing the games that I'd finished as merit badges on some imaginary scarf that doesn't exist. And and then the achievement stuff ties directly into that desire to say not only that I've done this thing and it was personal and it was for my own good, but also, I've done this thing and hey, check this out, look what I did. And found that I was doing a certain amount of that stuff just to be able to present it socially. And I definitely find less value in that as time goes on, but I find that is a contributing factor to a lot of the MMOs that I played early on and a lot of other stuff. So that's definitely kind of a dangerous pitfall trap. But right now, today, in this particular point in time, I'm playing games to get in there and figure out how all the pieces work together and see new interesting content and fresh ideas, because I feel like at this point, if I play a game and I can say that this is like that, is this the learned behavior thing that we talk about, but I need something that's a little bit off the beaten path to kind of fire brand new neurons and make me figure out brand new problems, which is a lot of what I like about Rimworld, to be honest, and why also a mod pack with tons of new incidents and tons of new things to learn has basically reinvigorated that game for me, because that is the driving factor. Okay, and I think that about wraps up all the questions that I've got here. Let's see, one last thing. Oh yeah, okay. This was what Chris and Enrique requested of me, so I'm gonna tell you a story from Rimworld, and I'm gonna call this a eulogy for Doug. A eulogy for Doug. Doug is dead. Doug was a hero. I'm telling you that in that order because the first thing directly inhibits his ability to do the second thing. But Doug was one of the best colonists I've ever had, and he's dead, and it was my fault. Which I'm telling you last because that's the least relevant part of this story. Doug came to the colony as part of an expedition to find a hidden temple. That's part of the SK mod pack stuff. You can send people off and then they come back with rewards, but you're down a colonist for 3 days. He came back as a part of one of that, and before that I'd been very picky about choosing who I wanted in my colony, only taking the best. And Doug was not the best. He had a bad back, but a decent melee skill and a decent research skill. So what Doug did was Doug held the line. In my kill box there was a single hallway to get into the base after the enemies had run through the field of fire. And I thought it was funny to put Doug up right in that hole and have him stand his ground and melee anybody who made it all the way through the firing line. And he did. That was the surprising thing about Doug. I thought it looked cool. I put him there, and just like a Spartan, he held the line against raid after raid after raid until the Antises came. And those are basically an insectoid faction. They're kind of a bummer. Anyway, so the insectoids came and Antises came. And they made it past the line. And they got a hold of Doug. And they took both of his legs off. And they took one of his arms off. But he survived. And they killed 2 people. The only last people alive were... What was the name of the other person? I can't remember. The colony's gone. Anyway, I had this person and I had Doug. And Doug couldn't get out of bed. He healed up. No problems. But he couldn't get out of bed. He had no legs and only one arm. And he couldn't get out of bed. But, see, Doug was a hero, and Doug held the line, so I patched him up. I built a prosthetics workbench, and then realized that needs power. So I built power for the prosthetics workbench. I went out of my way to make the tools that he needed to get back on his feet. No operation problems. I got both his legs back on. I got him a prosthetic arm back on. We're doing great. And now I thought of Doug as more expendable than ever. Even though I went through all this trouble. A psychic ship landed down off the corner of the map. I had 2 people, so who would I send? Obviously, I sent Doug, because Doug was expendable. I equipped him with some fusion grenades, and I ran him out there, and he blew it up. Again, like Doug, constantly surprising. Blew up the thing, ran the other 2 back to the base. It was a Scyther and a new one called a Stalker. Brought him back to the base where they encountered the other person waiting behind the firing line. Shot one of them down, and then the other one, with a railgun, with one shot, blasted Doug straight through the brain. So that is a good Rimworld story. I like that one a lot. It was very sad to watch him go down because at that point his research had actually gotten pretty decent. But that's one story from Rimworld about which there are many, many more. And I think on that note, I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you if you've stuck with me this far. That's awesome. If not, we'll see you next week. You can find us online at all the usual places. Send us an email, selectcharacters@gmail.com, or check out the Discord channel, or check out the YouTube channel. All of our social media stuff, we're out there and we're around. And other than that, if you've been patient, thank you for bearing with me, and we will see you next week.